Chapter 8: An examination of the theory of ethical relativism. Our discussion today is about the issue of ethical relativism. Is morality absolute or relative? That is, if a certain disposition, attitude, or action is described as moral, is this absolute? Is a moral attitude moral at all times for everybody under all circumstances? Or is an action which we call a moral action moral in relation to all individuals at all times in all conditions, as in saying, for example, 2 times 2 equals 4? Or is it relative? If we say that it is relative, it follows then that no disposition, attitude, or action can be absolutely described as moral and be regarded as such at all times, in all places, under all circumstances, for all individuals. This question must be addressed especially for us on account of our attachment to Islam, because the totality of precepts of the sacred religion of Islam, as our classical scholars have said, has 3 basic parts. The first part consists of thoughts and intelligible matters which are termed principles of beliefs, usuli aqaid. The second part consists of soul-related matters which are described as morality, akhlaq. The third part consists of physical matters or actions which are labeled laws, ahkam. Morality is an extraordinarily important part. In the Qur'an itself, there is a set of injunctions and decrees which are moral injunctions. On one hand, we know that for a fact that Islam has a certain distinctive feature, and that is the question of finality and eternity, and this necessitates that we regard morality as absolute, or at least we pose this question: do the decrees of Islam on matters pertaining to eternity necessitate that we regard morality as absolute, or are they also compatible with the moral relativity? First and foremost, we have to settle the issue of whether morality is absolute or relative. Then we will deal with Islam and see for ourselves what the decrees of Islam are regarding morality. Is it absolute or relative? This issue depends much on the previous questions on the criterion for moral action. According to some theories, morality is absolute, while others maintain that it is relative. We did not mention 1 or 2 theories which must be mentioned here. We have to mention them first, and then we shall explain the present subject. Approval. Some believe that there is basically no criterion for the morality of an action outside man himself. That is, there is no criterion for morality outside the approval and choice of man himself. Definitely, from the beginning, from ancient Greece, you have heard of scholars who have said that the criterion of all things is man. In science and philosophy, they also have said that the criterion for truth is also man and his discernment. Whatever he discerned to be the truth is the truth, and whatever he discerned to be falsehood is falsehood. This is exactly like the belief of some Muslim scholastic theologians or mutakallimun called Mu'tazila, the Mu'tazilites, concerning ijtihad, that whatever ijtihad a mujtahid gives is the truth, and there is no room for error in ijtihad. The truth is the ijtihad given by the mujtahid. Therefore, if 10 mujtahids give 10 different ijtihads on an issue, it follows that the truth has 10 different versions. Their exact opposite group were the Mukhatta'a, who said that the truth is nothing but one. Ijtihad may be in conformity with the reality and is useful, or it may not be in conformity with the reality. The Greeks had also the same opinion regarding the truth, saying the criterion for the truth is man and not the truth as the criterion for man. Man is the criterion for truth. The Greeks' discourse was about the truth and reality, about theoretical sciences, that is, about everything. So, if we say, for example, that there is God, they would say that since someone says that there is God, it follows that there is a God. And if another person says that there is no God, they would say that there is no God because the other person says so. This is a theoretical discussion. Nevertheless, there is a theory in ethics which has emerged recently. It makes the same line of argument in ethics, but not in regards to the truth. The difference between ethics and the truth is that the latter pertains to what is, while the former pertains to what must be. The proponents of this theory say that regarding what must be, or regarding what is moral and what is immoral, there is no existing criterion except man's approval. They also say what we mean by good morality is praiseworthy morality. Accordingly, the criterion for praiseworthy morality is that which is approved. Whatever disposition or khulq is approved is good. Approval, however, is variable, and through a course of time, social standards keep on changing. As social standards change, praiseworthy morality, quote unquote, itself naturally changes. A certain disposition was praiseworthy and approved by the public at a certain time and was therefore good. Later on, the same disposition was no longer praiseworthy, and what became praiseworthy was its opposite disposition. These vacillations and changes in that a disposition is praiseworthy at one time and is unacceptable at another time are based upon evolution, and their root is the spirit of the age or the spirit of society. The spirit of the age. Hegel popularized the term spirit of the age, or the zeitgeist. He believed that evolution or development is the law of this world. The spirit of the age constantly brings the society forward. In order to bring the society forward, this spirit, which serves as the spirit of society, exerts influence on ideas and thoughts. That is, the spirit of the age, in a sense, inspires a certain disposition or attitude, sees to it that it is in conformity with evolution, and abrogates another disposition or attitude which pertains to past conditions which are deemed outdated. In reality, Hegel believes in the spirit of the age or the spirit of society in the same way that others believe in God as the one who inspires good character in man. Of course, Hegel believes in God, but he says that the spirit of the age, or the spirit of society, inspires good disposition. And there are two differences between his view and that of other proponents of inspiration, quote unquote. Number one, Hegel regards the spirit of the age, or the spirit of society, as the inspirer, while they regard the metaphysical God as the inspirer. And, number two, they consider the inspirer a fixed, unitary, and absolute entity, while Hegel considers it a mutable and relative matter that momentarily changes according to the circumstances of the time. According to him, the inspirer itself changes with the changes of time and abrogates previous inspirations. This is one of the ideas that have greatly influenced the Europeans, and by extension, the people of the world. That is, it has undermined the foundation of inalterable criteria. One of our colleagues said that in one of the conferences he attended abroad, he addressed them thus. He said, "One day you Europeans believed in a Holy Spirit, getting inspiration from him, and on another day you get inspiration from the spirit of the age, or the zeitgeist. Your misery started when you started believing in a spirit of the age, and you gave the spirit of the age the same importance and value you had given to the Holy Spirit. As a result, you lost all immutable principles and criteria. You focused only on the exigency of time. Such and such is the demand of time." Spirit of the age means what? Who has discovered such a spirit which definitely pushes society to development, stimulates individuals to move forward, and changes scenarios? At any rate, there has been such an idea or view among the Europeans. If we say so, then definitely we have to regard morality as relative in this instance. There is another point. I have not seen it in their writings, but I think this is what they mean. That is, how does the spirit of the age operate? After a century, for example, do ideas change at once? Or do they change gradually? Granted that changes take place gradually, does it mean that there are also so-called forerunners who are the first to get inspiration and then inspire others? Is there always the class of forerunners and intellectuals in society that act as prophets? Prophets who do not get inspiration from God, but rather the spirit of the age? The members of this class are the first to receive inspiration, and then others follow them. In reality, their people believe this class has a kind of prophetic mission. If we subscribe to this notion, then definitely we will have no more immutable moral principles because the criterion is, after all, approval. Of course, we also accept that the criterion is approval and that social standards undergo changes, but we believe that the change in social standards is like the change in health. Health has a good and bad condition. Similarly, society has progress as well as decline, and not all changes in society can be treated as development. Qur'anic teachings also acknowledge that a community may progress and then become corrupt, and this corruption, which the Qur'an describes as moral corruption, leads to the perdition of the community. History also shows that societies are in a state of vacillation, and just as states progress, they also decline sometimes, and this decline will lead to their fall and deviation. Perhaps it can be accepted that the world in totality evolves, but this is different from regarding every society as evolving. Different societies have different standards for what is acceptable. After a millennium, for example, it can be said that humanity as a whole has made progress, but it is hard to believe this progress has occurred in all dimensions. Jean-Paul Sartre's statement. In any case, they say that like a plant grows, society also spontaneously makes progress, and in order to realize this progress, what society approves of changes and social standards are always harmonious with development. If one accepts this theory, it follows that morality is totally relative, just like Sartre says, since he evaluates everything on the basis of personal choice. According to him, there is no criterion for an action to be moral beyond man himself, but he says that when a person chooses to do a certain thing, his choice means that what he chooses is good, and obviously, no one chooses something which is bad. In fact, one chooses a thing as something good. Sartre also says that when a person chooses something for himself, he actually gives it value, and thus he will also choose the same thing for others. This is like our contention that a person promotes a thing by his action. If he does something good, he promotes a good thing, and if he does something bad, he promotes a bad thing. Although the action which a person chooses is particular, he gives it universality to it. For example, you choose a religion to follow. This action of yours is particular. That is, it is a personal or individual action which is related to you at a particular time and place. But in reality, there is also a sense of universality here. You give universality to this action. When you choose an action, its implication is that the said action is good for all people in general. In the words of Sartre, the criterion of an action to be moral is the individual morality of the doer. So, morality becomes a relative matter as it stems from individual choice. For the meantime, it is not our concern whether the basis of this notion is correct or not. In this theory, the criterion of an action's being moral is individual choice. Obviously, I would choose a certain action, and you would choose another action. So, for me, whose choice is this, what is moral is this action, and for you who choose another action, what is moral is that action. It is also different in another time. Yet, if we set aside this theory and take into consideration other theories which we have mentioned earlier, we can say that morality is not relative. Morality, the way we define it, is absolute, but concerning a moral action, there is nothing wrong in saying that it is relative. The concept of humanitarianism. In the theories we have mentioned earlier, among the things we have said was that some considered love the criterion of an action's being moral and that the target is other people. We have two things here. One is morality itself, which is a disposition, character, or moral trait of a person that refers to the same humanitarianism, philanthropy, or concern for the destiny of fellow human beings. We have to say that this is absolute, and it cannot be relative. It is absurd for this thing to be relative for a person and absolute for another person. To love fellow human beings and be concerned with their destiny, which is the root of rendering service to humanity, is in itself an absolute matter and is true for all people under all circumstances at all times. We may possibly say, this is not so. There is no sense of universality because it is possible that a human being is harmful, say a killer or corrupt person. Concerning such a person, every school of thought says that he must be resisted and eliminated. So, this has no universality too. The reply is, no, it does have universality. Humanitarianism is not contradictory with the campaign against corrupt individuals, and the corollary of loving fellow human beings is not to refuse resisting corrupt individuals. Firstly, we have said human beings, and not any specific person. If someone is harmful for human beings or human society, love and affection to the human society dictate that we must eliminate him. Secondly, it is not like someone who says that love of the human being pertains to a human being as an animal having so-called straight stature, a head, 2 ears, and 2 feet by which to walk. Human means humanity, that is, human virtues, not flesh and skin. If human means this flesh and skin, then there is no difference between a human and animal. The human being is also an animal which eats, sleeps, and has life and a sexual appetite. So he cannot be considered that important. When we say human, we refer to the human perfections and merits. Anyone who is anti-human cannot be considered a human being. At any rate, if we regard love of fellow human beings as the foundation of morality, then morality in the sense of a quality or character is an immutable matter. We shall deal with moral action later. Similarly, if we interpret morality to mean a set of the conscience's inspirations, definitely those inspirations are universal and immutable, and are applicable at all times because Kant considers immutable the subject as a universal matter at all times. We have said that Russell and others define morality differently, saying that the criterion for being moral is the harmony of individual interests and collective welfare, because man is a perfectly profit-oriented being, and he can only be motivated through personal interest. At most, if we expect him to do a certain moral action which is beneficial to others, we have to broaden his perspective and let him understand that his interests are concordant with the society's interests. According to this school of thought, morality as a quality is also an immutable matter and not relative. We have said that there is another school of morality, and that is the school of our classical scholars. Their view regarding morality is the principle of justice, based upon the immaterial spirit. They say that good character means that there must be a sort of balance and equilibrium among all powers and faculties under the absolute command of the power of intellect, such that all powers and instincts are subservient to this ruler. According to this principle, it is also evident that morality is an absolute matter, that man is such that his powers and instincts are obedient to his power of intellect does not allow us to say that this time is different from another time. To be obedient means to be obedient. There is also the Platonic school based upon beauty, asserting that the root of morality is the spirit's beauty, which is also an immutable matter, and according to this school of thought, morality is something absolute. Of course, Plato recognized balance and moderation as the root of beauty. Attitude as relative. There is another point, and that is, the absoluteness of morality must not be confused with the absoluteness of moral action. In other words, one cannot focus on a particular action and say that the said action is always moral, just as another action cannot be said to be always immoral. Often, most individuals err by thinking that the requisite of absolute and immutable morality is for us to classify actions at the outset, setting aside a group of actions as moral and another group as immoral. It must be stated, however, that this is not so. In the words of our classical scholars, actions differ according to forms and merits. That is, it is possible for an action with a certain merit to be moral and to be immoral with a different merit. To say that a certain action is absolute or relative is different from saying that morality is absolute or relative. Let me cite an example. Is slapping an orphan a moral and good action or an immoral and bad action? Mere slapping of an orphan without any specific context cannot be ruled as being good or bad. Sometimes people slap an orphan to take something, and sometimes people punish an orphan to teach good manners, and discipline requires such an action. Thus, slapping an orphan has no absolute ruling, whether it is absolutely good or absolutely bad. In fact, it is good in line with teaching good manners, and it is bad in other cases such as taking something or driving away or subduing the orphan. Likewise, in Surah Duha, or chapter 93, verses 9 to 10, God states, "So, as for the orphan, do not oppress him, and as for the beggar, do not chide him." And how about bowing to another person? We say that the cases differ. There is a time when one bows to another person with the intention of paying respect. In this case, if the said person is worthy of respect, this action is moral. And there is also a time when one bows to the same person with the intention of mockery. In this case, it can no longer be the same, or moral in this case. Thus, this action, bowing to another person, has different rulings on different cases. That is, it may be moral in one place and immoral at another. Perhaps we have no action in Islam which does not have different rulings on what the seminary students say secondary appellations, primary and secondary appellations. Our scholars have a very good terminology here. Primary appellations and secondary appellations. What they mean is that everything has a distinct name or appellation of its own. That is, an attribute is applied to it, but sometimes another appellation is attributed to it. For example, Zayd is a person, but sometimes a secondary appellation is given to him. In other words, another attribute apart from his primary appellation is given to him. For instance, Zayd is a person, a learned person, or an unjust person. The other appellation he has is a secondary one. Secondary means of a second degree. One may also have a third, fourth, fifth, or so on appellations. It is exactly like a person who has many occupations. Primarily, Zayd is the son of Amr, but he is also a university professor. At the same time, he is also the Speaker of the Parliament and head of the company. He has many appellations. There is a specific ruling on each thing on the basis of each appellation given to it. For example, if we are asked whether mutton is a lawful or an unlawful meat, we say that it is a lawful meat. Then, if we are asked whether pork is lawful or unlawful, we say that it is unlawful. The primary appellation of mutton is a lawful meat, and the primary appellation of pork is unlawful meat. But the same lawful meat in its secondary appellation can also be unlawful. Let us assume that it belongs to another person. In view of the fact that it is owned by another person, eating it is unlawful because it is stolen. So mutton as meat is lawful, but as something belonging to another person, it is unlawful to consume. And the pork, which is unlawful, can be lawful in a certain case. For instance, when a person is put in a situation wherein his survival depends on eating pork, it is not only lawful but even obligatory, wajib. That is, if he does not eat it and he dies, he commits a sin. And we have many other similar examples. Sometimes we want to focus on the action and at another time on the quality. If we want to focus on the quality, then according to Hegel, Sartre, and those who say and assert that there is no criterion for morality except man's approval or choice, morality or character is a relative or subjective matter. But if we disregard these schools of thought, morality as a character or quality can be considered an immutable matter, but a moral action cannot be. An example of modesty and chastity. Those who claim that morality is relative say, for example, that there was a time when modesty was good in certain societies, according to the need and condition of those societies, because the lifestyle then was feudal, and feudal lifestyle dictated that family must be independent and separate and that women must be under the tutelage of men. The interest or welfare of these affairs dictated so, and inevitably it was better to emphasize the principles of modesty as much as possible. Yet industrial lifestyle later came and women were dragged to the midst of society in factories. There was a time when modesty was a good disposition, and today it is not so. However, based upon the foundation we have mentioned, this contention is wrong. As a state of the soul, modesty or chastity means the tameness of the sensual power under the command of reason and faith, not to be under the sway of carnal desires, not to have greed, not to be like those who are slaves to their carnal passions and instincts. Thus, modesty is good at all times. Yes, the moral action which we call modesty may assume different forms, but not according to their measure. For in their measure, modesty does not make any difference at all. For instance, there is this widely cited juristic example. There is a sick woman who is in need of a doctor, and there is no lady doctor. And the male doctor, who is the only one available, must touch a certain part of her body, and occasionally, in certain illnesses, he must touch a private part of her body, under the assumption that her life is in danger. In this case, it is permissible to consult a male doctor. For a non-mahram man to look at her and touch part of a woman's body is against modesty, but under certain circumstances, this very action is stripped of its being immoral. Yet, this does not mean that modesty loses its value as a disposition, quality, or character. Its value remains. It is the action representing it which changes. Of course, it can thus be inferred that actions and activities which depend more on economic, industrial, and technological conditions change significantly, and the actions like those related to modesty, covering, and chastity, which are less dependent on these affairs, do not change significantly. Changes related to either population or economic, technological conditions do not have a pertinent effect. This issue of modesty is related to the kind of relationship and attraction that two people of the opposite genders can have with each other. Since the principles are immutable, the moral action they represent is always identical too. Therefore, moral action and morality itself must be distinguished from each other. Those who promote morality must do two things. In recommending certain dispositions or characters, they must be recommended as absolute matters, but at the same time, a sort of awareness and ijtihad must be also given to people so that in practice they would not confuse a moral action with an immoral one. I remember that during my early days in Qom, I heard that a lot of Japanese people with failing religions requested for the dispatch of Muslim missionaries. Missionaries from certain countries of the Muslim world were sent off to propagate their respective schools of thought. The late Ayatollah Sheikh Abdul Karim Hayri ordered someone who was smarter than his colleagues to go to Japan. That person did not obey, saying that perhaps he would die in the land of disbelievers, quote unquote. As a result, a group of missionaries from Egypt went there and 20,000 people became Sunni Muslims. This is a product of lack of assessment. An example of truthfulness. We have many instances of that lack of assessment. We treat a moral action as something contrary to morality while regarding an immoral action as something moral. For example, truthfulness per se is good, and one must be honest, and telling a lie on account of its being a distortion of reality is bad, and one must not tell a lie. Yet, can one be honest at all times, and is telling a lie unlawful in all situations? There are situations when telling a lie is definitely obligatory, and it is surprising that recently some people criticize Sa'adi for saying that a falsehood resulting in conciliation is better than a truth producing trouble. This is a very valid statement. Yet some people say that anyone who tells a lie should at least take into account a particular expediency. A profit-oriented lie is different from an expedient lie. Why does a person want to tell the truth? It is for collective welfare. Why should one not tell a lie? Well, that is because it is contrary to collective welfare. But when the same lie serves an individual or collective well-being, it is obvious that one must tell a lie. Many figures, including a gentleman by the name of Jordan, who was the president of an American educational institution, have criticized Sa'adi for saying that a falsehood resulting in conciliation is better than a truth producing trouble. Zoroastrians also take issue with Sa'adi for making such a statement. A prominent intellectual, historian, and literary man of contemporary Iran, Muhit Tabatabai, once wrote an article stating that when the British came to India, where, at that time, the Farsi language was prevalent, among the books which were banned from being taught, this was a move which was also supported by Zoroastrians, was Sa'adi's Gulistan, for allegedly morally corrupting the children by stating that a falsehood resulting in conciliation is better than a truth producing trouble. And then they added that the libertines knew this action has another cause, and that is a different thing mentioned in the initial part of the book, stating, O merciful God, who, out of thine hidden treasures, afford daily sustenance to the Zoroastrian and the infidel, how can thou exclude thy friends, thou who designed this favorably to regard thine enemies? From the beginning, it was ingrained in children's minds that Zoroastrians and Christians are enemies of God, and since they did not want that statement of Sa'adi to be uttered, they took that as a pretext. Otherwise, which intellect in the world still needs to know the meaning of true and false, and which intellect does not know that under certain circumstances telling the truth is worse than any other crime? Of course, under such circumstances, telling a lie must only be to that extent which is necessary. One must avoid telling a truth which guides another person to do a crime. It must be in the form of dissimulation. For example, there is a story of Abu Dharr carrying the Prophet, peace be with him and his progeny, on his back while being covered with cloak. He came and made the Prophet pass by the faithless Quraysh, who asked him, O Abu Dharr, what are you carrying on your back? Muhammad, he replied. This was a truth which they did not believe. If he knew that this truth was believable for them faithless people, to tell it was forbidden for him, and it was more prohibited than anything else. Undoubtedly, in a case like reconciling two parties, there is no objection if one tells a lie. We have cases in jurisprudence in which telling a lie is permissible. For example, reconciling two parties. This is the meaning of expediency, saving the life of an innocent person by telling a lie, as in the story of Sa'adi, also belongs to this category. In such situations, it is certainly better to tell a lie. The point is that one must distinguish between moral action and morality itself. That moral action changes is also compatible with Islam. For instance, one may ask, is it lawful or unlawful to steal? We say, it is unlawful. One may ask again, is there any situation when stealing is permissible? We say, yes, it may happen that it is even obligatory. End of chapter 8.